Yesterday I asked for your thoughts on what Newcastle United could and should do between now and the end of the transfer window. Today I'm going to be discussing a club record deal for Stuttgart striker Nick Woltemade. It's come from absolutely nowhere and it's a really exciting development. What does it mean for Newcastle? What does it mean for Alexander Isak? We'll also be discussing the Champions League draw and also looking ahead to Leeds and who'll start in that game with so many selection headaches for Eddie Howe. So much to get into today, so let's do that. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe and like if you haven't already joined the community. Trying to get to 2,000 subscribers, that's the next target. Thank you all so much for your support. This is the final Friday of NUFC Transfer Daily. There'll be a video looking back at the Leeds game with a bit more of a transfer angle on Sunday, and then a couple more next week on the transfer situation on deadline day, and then one looking back at the transfer window as a whole. I'll then take a little bit of a break probably to decide what I want to do with content in terms of coming up after the international break. There's some plans that I've got in place in terms of extra content as well, and they'll be announced in due course. So let me know if you have any thoughts on that. I did ask you earlier in the summer what your thoughts are. I do have an idea of what you guys want, but I really appreciate all the support all the same. Today there is plenty to talk about. I asked for your questions and all of them were regarding Yoane, Wissa, Jørgen Strand Larsen, maybe a couple on Nicholas Jackson that I didn't get into as well, and Alexander Isak were all the main focus. Nobody mentioned Nick Woltemade, and suddenly he's on Tyneside about to sign a club record deal for around £69 million according to Keith Downey and Sky. There are various different valuations out there depending on add-ons, as is usually the case, but Newcastle United have found their striker target. He feels very much like a project signing. Those are the words we used on the True Faith reaction pod last night, and it really does feel like the dominoes are moving for Alexander Isak to move to Liverpool. I'll explain why that is the case, even though Eddie Howe was asked about that this morning and it didn't really comment on it. He still wants Isak to integrate if he can, but I've been very clear in my stance that I thought Alexander Isak would have to reintegrate, would have to stay, because the striker market was there's such a dearth of quality options out there. Woltemade was somebody a lot of you guys in the comment section mentioned, and I have touched on him a little bit in the past, but I thought he was destined for Bayern Munich, and also I think we'll talk about his goal scoring record, and I think that was a big reason why I didn't really see him directly as an Isak replacement. So I'm really surprised that they've actually made this move, but I think reading between the lines, the reaction from what's happened in that Monday meeting between the PIF ownership and Jamie Rubin and Alexander Isak before the Liverpool game, if you read Craig Hope's piece in the Mail, it really does paint the picture that it isn't a positive thing, and Newcastle maybe do need a contingency plan earlier than I maybe thought. I mean, they were looking at Strand Larsen and Wissa as potential Wilson replacements alongside Isak. That was the brief. Until Woltemade signs and until Isak goes, that will always be a possibility. But there are big reasons why I think that Woltemade is not a Wilson replacement and is in fact an Isak replacement. And that's why I think that this deal, suddenly it sounds like I'm completely changing my tune, and that's probably because I am. I do think Isak will now move to Liverpool. Newcastle still chasing Yoane, Wissa as well as Nick Woltemade. It does mean that Jørgen Strand Larsen will not be through the door by the sounds of it, because he's too similar to Woltemade. We'll talk a bit more about him in a second, but the reason why I think he's not a Wilson replacement and is in fact a replacement for Alexander Isak is because stylistically he's very similar in lots of ways, in terms of his dribbling, in terms of dropping deep and linking the play, in terms of his skill set in build up. I think that's a crucial thing, and also I think to get him over the line, he really feels like that sort of project player, as I said, to get him over the line to beat Bayern Munich to his signature, because that's why I thought it wouldn't be worth talking about him much, because I thought he'd go to Bayern, but they've got financial issues. Stuttgart didn't sell him to them. Newcastle then came in late this week with the bid and got it done, very quickly in the way that they did Isak and Tonali previously. It's one of those signings. It's really exciting news that they've gone and got this deal done. But to get it done, I think the big thing that Newcastle could offer him that Bayern couldn't is immediate first-team football. I think that they've told Woltemade that you will be the main man this season. I don't think he would join Newcastle if he wasn't. Although having Isak still in the building suggests that it's possible, I think now we'll see Liverpool make that bid. And as we've always said, really, I mean, 150 million is the valuation, but I don't think the actual money situation is the problem for Liverpool and Newcastle. I think reality is that they will come to some sort of agreement, and Isak's really sort of made the bed this week in terms of his stance, and I think he would reintegrate. I don't think he would for a second go AWOL or refuse to play or anything like that after the deadline, but I think Newcastle have just realised that maybe it's best for everybody in the scenario, as I sort of alluded to yesterday, if they can get that replacement, and Woltemade became available. And I know that lots of people are saying he's a low choice on the list and why didn't they go for him earlier, but it's very much like Alexander Isak. They got him late in the window. He was the last of those real exciting players at that sort of level available, and he wasn't really on the list high up, even though Newcastle really liked him. They bolted the price a couple of weeks earlier than paying 65 million or 63 million, whatever it was. In the end, they really wanted Darwin Núñez, and this is what's really strange to me, is how narratives develop and how narratives move, because Darwin Núñez has obviously been an abject failure at Liverpool, and Alexander Isak has gone completely in the other direction. So it's strange to say that, but Newcastle didn't have Alexander Isak as the top of their list because they would have signed him earlier. I don't think they really had a major striker at the top of their list that summer until Callum Wilson got injured. So needs must, reactions, things change. It doesn't necessarily mean that the player isn't wanted and the player won't be a massive success, because this really is very much like Alexander Isak in that sense of him coming in late in the window and really giving everybody a massive jolt of positivity at a time when it's probably needed. It will probably mean that Isak goes. We'll see what happens with Yoane Wissa as well. I still hope that Newcastle hold firm as close to the valuation as they can get, and they don't sell until they get a replacement in, and they don't sort of crumble and let him go and have Woltemade in for Isak with Asula and Gordon as backup options. I think they do need another quality striker, and it feels like it will be Wissa now. It doesn't really feel like there's many other options. They don't want Strand Larsen because he's too similar to Woltemade in terms of his height, and I don't think that Woltemade isn't a target man. I know he's 6'6", but he's not a target man. He's much more of a delicate football. His strength is with his feet, whereas Strand Larsen is a target man. But I think they want sort of a smaller, more diminutive striker who's a little bit quicker to complement Woltemade or Isak or Strand Larsen in that scenario, rather than having Strand Larsen with Woltemade as well. So we'll see if they get Wissa over the line. That's got to be the next focus. Whether that's linked now to Alexander Isak going out because of the money situation. I think Newcastle's budget is probably gone now in terms of what they've got to spend after Woltemade without a sale, and obviously Isak's sale will be massive for PSR in the future for matching UEFA's PSR rules as well. It'll be needed. I think that was probably always likely. I think that was likely always the plan next summer for him to go and be that player, because I think he was always going to push at some point, and I think it's taken people by surprise that he's gone now. But Newcastle can react once they've got Woltemade in. The big thing was that they didn't have any leverage. They didn't have any way of making a stand themselves. They now have that player in to give themselves a foothold in this whole thing, and we'll see if Liverpool come in. As I say, I think Liverpool are waiting in the wings with money that Newcastle will find acceptable. I think that isn't the problem once Newcastle have their replacements in. Max Bayer is now not going to Brentford, so we'll see what happens with that, and all those dominoes have to fall in terms of Wissa. But the big thing is that the Nick Woltemade deal looks like it's going to be done, and he won't be able to play at Leeds, Eddie Howe says, but he'll be back in for that Wolves game, for that debut then. And just as to say, we've been through his stats, and I do appreciate that lots of you guys in the comment section have been sort of beating this drum for quite a while, but look how rounded he is. 79th percentile for non-penalty goals, which is by no means elite. I think that's where I'm a little bit concerned about. I don't see him being a natural goal scorer in the way I always saw Alexander Isak, because I followed his career since he was at AIK as a teenager, and you knew that he was going to be an explosive goal-scoring striker one day. I'm not quite convinced with that with Woltemade, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the worst thing in the world. If you look at non-penalties expected goals, again, 81st percentile, but non-penalties, expected assists, 95th percentile, shot creating actions, 96th percentile, 99th percentile for touches, 95th percentile for successful take-ons, and also defensively blocks, 96th percentile as well. Aerial duels, which is quite interesting considering he's 6'6", 67th percentile. So not disastrous, but it really does paint that picture that he's much better as a creator, as a talented, exciting, real sort of technical footballer, rather than a big bustling target man, despite being 6'6". I think he'll score goals, but I just don't think he's going to replace Isak in terms of those numbers immediately. If you can get Wissa in to add some goals to that, again, thinking of the accumulative nature of the whole thing and the Moneyball situation, it's a really good signing. And if you have Wissa and Woltemade scoring more goals than Wilson and Isak, Newcastle will be in a better position when you think of it like that. In a dream scenario for me, I'm not one of those people who's really turned on Alexander Isak in the way that lots of people have. I'd love to have him reintegrated in the squad as well, but it really doesn't feel like that's possible. I think now my prediction has completely changed from yesterday. It'll be Woltemade, and I think they will get Wissa over the line. They need to get somebody before they sanction that move for Isak, but crucially, the first domino has fallen. Woltemade is coming through the door. He's on Tyneside now. He's having his medical. He won't be there for Leeds most likely, and we'll talk about the team news later, but yeah, huge news, huge shock news. Nobody saw this coming, and it was really amazing to see that it broke through Craig Hope initially. Sort of an hour, 2 hours later, he was flying to Newcastle, and that's the sort of thing that Newcastle United have been able to do over the last couple of years. They haven't done it for a while, and I think lots of people had asked the question, would we see that this summer? And there was a Q&A a month or so ago where somebody asked that question. I did see that coming. I did see Newcastle being able to do that at some stage, but I did not see Nick Woltemade coming through the door. So I know a lot of you in the comment section will be very, very pleased with this. Let me know how excited you are to hear that Nick Woltemade is coming to Newcastle United. What does it mean for Alexander Isak? What does it mean for Yoane Wissa? Let me know what you think. I will also move on to the Champions League draw. The home fixtures are Barcelona, Benfica, PSV Eindhoven and Athletic Club. Their away fixtures PSG, Bayer Leverkusen, Marseille and Union Saint-Gilloise of Belgium. Really, really exciting. There's a piece in the description of my analysis of the group stage on Forbes from last night. I'm really quite pleased with it. Obviously Barcelona's the big one. That was very exciting. The Tino Asprilla game obviously comes to mind, talking about the Bobby Robson connection with them, and PSV Eindhoven returned to the club for Athletic because of the friendly that they played a couple of years ago. There's a very friendly relationship there, but it'll be a very competitive game as well. Some tough away games that I think will really be the crux of how Newcastle do in this draw, because you've got to go to Marseille. Bad memories from the Velodrome from 21 years ago when Didier Drogba broke my heart as a 10-year-old and knocked Newcastle out of the UEFA Cup semi-finals. Bayer Leverkusen, again, good memories under Bobby Robson in the Champions League 20 years ago there. But there's some good opportunities as well. PSG, can they avenge that Tino Livramento handball from the Parc des Princes 2 years ago? And Union Saint-Gilloise is a really exciting draw for me because I love the idea of going to Brussels. I'll hopefully be at a couple of these games at the very least, and also hopefully as many of the home ties too. But Union Saint-Gilloise is a really exciting team because they're a very small provincial club in Brussels that's been built up by Tony Bloom, the owner of Brighton. They've used data in very similar ways. They've got a very unorthodox squad, a couple of English lads. Ross Sykes is apparently a Newcastle fan. There was a defender who, there was a clip of him going around his reaction to the draw, which is great. Christian Burgess, a former Middlesbrough defender who I spoke to for a piece for BBC Sport, I think 3 or 4 years ago, which I'll link in the description. It gives you a bit of a backdrop onto what type of club Union Saint-Gilloise are and how that could be a really interesting tie. I think those are the games, those 3 away games plus the home games, where you think Newcastle can pick up points against PSV. They can give Barcelona a really tough game. They can give Benfica a really tough game. Obviously Benfica with Europa League heartbreak from 12 years ago as well. I was in Lisbon for that and that was amazing. But they'll be at St James's Park as well. Hopefully a little bit of revenge there. Lots of really exciting teams and draws in this Champions League, and I think the big thing that I'll take from this is that the league phase is always going to help Newcastle. You play 2 teams from every pot, so there's an opportunity to build a good foundation in the Champions League. You just want to finish in the top 24 to get through to that playoff round. You don't want to finish in the bottom 12. Getting through would be about 60 or 70 million pounds in the coffers. Then you can build to get further in the competition. I think Newcastle will be ready for it. Last time it was very emotional, and that drove them on against PSG in the home game in the 4-1, but I think it cost them a little bit later against Dortmund and against AC Milan. They were desperately chasing the Milan game, for example, and they lost it to go out of Europe completely, when if they'd drawn it they would have gone into the Europa League. Against Dortmund, they were just outclassed and outfought and outthought, I thought, at St James's Park, and then bullied in Germany as well. I think there's real good opportunities to show how much they've developed as players and as a club, and the team is just much more ready, I think. You saw it in the Carabao Cup, how they learned from just the excitement of being there the first time around against Manchester United. It was business when they were back there against Liverpool, and I would imagine it's very similar to that with the Champions League this year. I'm really excited. I think Newcastle can give that a good go, and I expect them to get at least into the playoffs and hopefully building on further into the latter stages, because if you see what Villa did last season in very similar circumstances, everything is possible. So let me know what you think in the comment section on the Champions League draw. We'll just touch on the Leeds game. What do you think the starting 11 will be? There's quite a few question marks over Sandro Tonali's fitness. Eddie Howe said that isn't as serious as first feared. He could be involved. It's unlikely in my mind that he will be. Fabian Schär is okay despite the concussion last week. Newcastle followed the protocols and he's fine. He must have passed a test on that. So I think he will start next to Dan Burn, Tino Livramento at left back, and Kieran Trippier was right back. The midfield is really the interesting thing. I've got Miley and I've gone Ramsey and I've gone Bruno. No Joe Linton. Joe Linton will be back hopefully at the other end of the international break. And up front, the other big thing to talk about is, will Asula, will he start? He scored against Liverpool. Or will Anthony Elanga go down the middle and Jacob Murphy come in on that right hand side? Harvey Barnes on the left. There's no obviously Anthony Gordon. For me, I think Newcastle need to start Will Asula. I think his physical profile means that the team plays better. As I've said, my biggest issue when you have a more diminutive non-striker up front like Gordon and probably by extension Elanga, the rest of the team just hesitates a little bit, whereas actually they look more comfortable when you have that powerful player like Asula. Obviously in the ideal world it'd be Isak, but that physical player up front really does make a difference. And if you aren't going to start Asula after scoring a goal like he did against Liverpool, when are you going to start him? That's a big question over his situation. I think he's developed. I think there was a positive answer in the press conference, and that is why I'm doing this video a little bit late, because I watched Eddie Howe's press conference to sort of get some notes for it. But I think for me, Will Asula should start, and I think he will start up front because of the profile, because he deserves it after scoring against Liverpool. Again, let me know what you think. So that's three major topics: Woltemade coming in, the Champions League draw, and Leeds away. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll be back on Sunday with a reaction to the Leeds game and more transfer stuff. Monday as well for a deadline day transfer daily. Tuesday for a review and a debrief of everything. And then big plans coming after the international break for the next stage of the channel across this season. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you then. Cheers.